Here today at Sam Houston State University with Dr. Larry Hoover, who's a distinguished professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. Dr. Hoover received his PhD from Michigan State in 1974, and in that same year he worked to develop the Criminal Justice Graduate Education Program at Michigan State with assistance from the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, otherwise known as the LEAA. Dr. Hoover's been a member of the faculty at Sam Houston State since 1977. His contributions to the practice and study of criminal justice are diverse. He's a past president of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. He received the O.W. Wilson Award from the ACJS Police Section, the ACJS Founders Award, and he was designated as a member of the Michigan State University Wall of Fame. During his career at Sam Houston State University, Dr. Hoover played a pivotal role in the creation of the Law Enforcement Management Institute of Texas, otherwise known as LEMIT. Additionally, he created the Criminal Research Information Management Evaluation System, which is a comprehensive police management information system that's currently in use by over 50 police departments around the state. The program continues to expand and grow and now includes probation and institutional corrections. He's the author of 6 books. The most recent is Police Crime Control Strategies, published by Cengage. Dr. Hoover, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Right. I'd like to start by asking you to talk about what led you to get into this line of work.
Well, when I began my academic career as a freshman at Michigan State University, I had intentions of going to law school. And what was then called the School of Police Administration and Public Safety sounded more interesting, glamorous than political science as a pre-law major. And so enrolled in that school, and obviously made that a major part of my career.
All right. So could you talk about how your personal life has contributed to your professional work and development?
Well, interestingly, I worked during my college years at diverse part-time jobs, but 2 in particular stand out as an experience which has stayed with me all these years. Mm-hmm. One was working on the factory line at Fisher Body Plant in Lansing. At those days, we assembled Oldsmobiles. Oldsmobiles no longer exist, but assembled Oldsmobiles. And that was a real lesson in organizational dynamics and relationship between operational workers and management. Just to give you one quick war story as an illustration, the first summer that I worked at the Fisher Body Plant, I was responsible for a spot welder. One of those big machines that are now done by robots, been replaced by a robot since then. And you had to put welds. My role was to weld the roof to the side frame of the automobile as it rolled by on the assembly line. I prided myself at getting pretty good at that. The trick to it was to hold the spot weld long enough that it sealed, but not too long because you'd burn all the way through the 2 metal plates. About the time I'd been there 2 weeks and was proud of the job I was doing, I was approached by a union representative. And the union representative explained to me that the real problem is whenever those welds don't hold right, and we want to be very certain that they're going to hold. And if I burned through every 3rd or 4th unit that went by, that was okay because one of the brothers or sisters of the United Auto Workers job down the line was to repair that weld. 20-year-old Larry Hoover understood the situation perfectly well, and every 4th Oldsmobile that came by, I held that spot welder down until she smoked, and kept my brother or sister down the line employed. Yeah. That's a simple illustration of the dynamic between management and labor that existed, and it led to a great deal of organizational maturation on my part, and I've used illustrations out of that experience yet in teaching organization theory and criminal justice years later. Second part-time job that I had, summer job that I had, was working on the mental health ward of the St. Lawrence Hospital. At the time, it served as the community-based mental health facility for Lansing, and I was an orderly in that role, and developed a deep respect for efforts to improve the lives of the mentally ill. Later, that at least is part of what manifested itself in one of the books that I developed with Tom Buchanan and Vladimir Sergevin of the Illinois Training Council, entitled Improving Police Response to Persons with Mental Illness. So both of those are instances of, on the personal side, a contribution to career later on.
Yeah. You know, your discussion about the organizational dynamics in the auto body plant, you know, that's one of the aspects of the program at Michigan State that still remains very strong today, and its interdisciplinary nature. How did your experience there, do you think, help develop that part of Michigan State, if at all?
Interestingly, Michigan State, at the time I was there, as a bachelor's degree, and then later as in a graduate program even, was developed initially with the goal of producing police administrators.
Okay.
And so the coursework was organized around the teaching of basically a specialized public administration degree. The O.W. Wilson book, Police Administration, was our Bible, and we followed that religiously. Interestingly, though, the placement of baccalaureate graduates directly into police administration roles never happened. The very early days, the 1950s, early 60s, the federal government, federal law enforcement agencies actually recruited heavily at Michigan State, and a high proportion of the graduates went to the FBI, the Secret Service, and the like, Postal Inspection Service with the federal government. If you went into law enforcement, you went in as a patrol officer, not as a lateral entry police lieutenant. That evolved with time, and one of the things that brought about its evolution, its change, was the introduction of corrections into the program. So that before the massive name change to criminal justice around the country, Michigan State had a very strong corrections program, particularly institutional corrections. And I came within a hair's breadth of pursuing corrections instead of law enforcement in my own career, and have maintained a healthy, what I regard a healthy interest in both yet today.
Yeah, okay. You know, we were talking about this earlier. You're in a great position to be able to talk about the early growth of the program in Michigan State, which is a very early program in criminal justice, and the growth and establishment of the program here at Sam Houston State. Can you talk about, you know, similarities and differences and how these two early programs developed and have evolved over time?
Yes, and it's an interesting contrast between the two. Michigan State's program started out very clearly with the police emphasis, the law enforcement emphasis. Its creation is traceable back to the influence of August Vollmer and O.W. Wilson, both. Started in conjunction with a heavy component internship, one-year internship with the Michigan State Police, as a matter of fact. So there's that notion, it was law enforcement administration. And then with time, a higher and higher proportion of students were interested in corrections, and faculty were brought on board in corrections, and did outstanding work in that respect. In contrast to that, at Sam Houston State, the program was initiated, called the Institute of Contemporary Corrections and the Behavioral Sciences, and was placed here in Huntsville, Texas, because that was the headquarters, still is the headquarters of what is now the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division, and was designed to produce corrections professionals, probation officers, parole officers, institutional counselors, other program personnel, and from the outset realized that goal. Unlike the goal of police administration at Michigan State, this one was successful with corrections. like Michigan State, they developed a portion of the student body and the faculty, some of the faculty hires, with an interest in law enforcement. So that faculty began to be hired in 1972 with a law enforcement background. And the number of students interested in that particular area grew exponentially. Grew so rapidly that more and more faculty were hired with a police background, myself included, in 1977. And as I'm fond of saying, they let the dogs in and the dog ate the doghouse. So that our last 25 years of deans have had a law enforcement background. And there are those of us who worry a bit about not forgetting to dance with who brought you, and to maintain a good, strong corrections program. And jumping ahead a little bit, as part of the law enforcement information system program we're developing, we're now working with probation and institutional corrections to include them.
Right. So as other, and thinking back on that time in the mid 1970s, when other universities were looking at establishing academic programs in corrections or law enforcement or criminal justice, did they reach out to you and some folks here at Sam Houston State or at Michigan State to get advice on what was happening in these academic programs in those early days?
Yes, very much so. One of the real catapults of criminal justice education in the United States was the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. And in particular, one of its programs, the Law Enforcement Education Program, or LEAP, was provided grants to students and/or loans to students that would be forgiven at a rate of 25% a year for every year they stayed with a criminal justice agency. The number of institutions interested in developing a criminal justice program exploded. Unfortunately, not all of them for the right reasons. A number of them developed programs wherein half of the degree credits required would be awarded for past experience, completion of a police academy. In response to that, the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences developed an accreditation program which had an enormous effect on improving the quality of education for criminal justice. Some of the institutions faded from the scene. Some of them made a transition into being solid, high-quality programs. But in any case, the number of such programs grew fivefold over the years that the law enforcement education program was in effect.
Switching gears a little bit, one of the things that you've done, in my opinion, very well over the course of your career is work closely with police agencies and police training institutes around the country. How have you seen those partnerships between academics and police agencies evolve?
Interestingly, I'll go all the way back to my graduation with a baccalaureate degree and lead that forward. Whenever I completed the bachelor's degree, I decided I needed some extra money before I moved on to law school. Was admitted to the University of Michigan Law School, but deferred the admission and went to work for the Lansing, Michigan Police Department. As it happened, it created even stronger desire to stay with law enforcement, stay with policing, and to make my career there, not as an attorney. And gave up on the law school ambitions. Spent 4 years on the Lansing Police Department. Interestingly, at that point in time, although there were 2 individuals who had gotten baccalaureate degrees after being on the police department, I was the first individual assigned that was hired with a bachelor's degree by the Lansing PD. And had to watch myself very carefully because I was being watched by others in terms of how that would work out. In that atmosphere, there was not a congenial relationship between the vast majority of academic programs and agencies. Instead, there was a great deal of mistrust, and it was difficult. It was a major achievement to get permission from an agency to conduct research in that agency. That's come 180 degrees since those days. And now we find ourselves in a situation where agency doors are, by and large, wide open to research efforts, and they actually encourage and welcome those efforts.
It's kind of sticking with that theme a little bit. What about the evolution of research methods that you've seen used in these partnership efforts?
Well, it's clearly the methodological sophistication has improved by leaps and bounds, so that the best would be done in those early days as a correlation coefficient, and that was as sophisticated as the statistical analysis would become. Now we have very sophisticated statistical analysis, and that's a good thing. I don't want to be misinterpreted. But there is a however, and that however is I sometimes worry that our students don't understand or appreciate the difference between statistical significance and substantive significance, so that whenever you get through with the number crunching and can only explain 5% of the variance in an independent variable, substantively you're not contributing much, despite the fact that may be statistically significant. And there certainly needs to be some balance in that respect for research efforts. Another element of the research is its application to what law enforcement agencies would call the real world, and of substantive significance and implied policy changes and adjustment of policy and so forth. There are relatively few researchers who stay for at least a portion of their effort on the policy side. You are one of very few, and your work with eyewitness identification, with sexual assault, with near repeat shootings, and so forth, translate to policy. Now, not everything has to translate to policy, and agencies will certainly welcome academics into their programs, into their agencies, with esoteric work. But once in a while, researchers need to do something that contributes directly to the policy decisions of those agencies.
Yeah, and I think I think you're right that a policy orientation can certainly help police researcher partnerships go well. What other aspects of those relationships have you seen that keep that partnership on track and moving forward and remaining successful over a long period of time?
I think that this is a delicate issue, but researchers should not look towards uncovering malfeasance, misfeasance, and so forth if they want a long-term relationship with agencies. Now, it's touchy because if you're a researcher and you encounter serious abuses of authority, no one, myself included, would suggest that you stay mute about that. That needs to be brought out. But you stay within channels. You don't run down to the local television station with this expose that you're running, and you don't get caught up as an academic in investigative reporters' efforts to uncover malfeasance and misfeasance. You have to be very careful when you grant an interview what the purpose of that the news media is, and paying some attention to that, being careful with that, being aware that that's a risk is important. It's important that we convey that to students.
Mm-hmm. Right. Could you describe a couple of your projects that you have found to be either, could be both most rewarding and or most influential?
Certainly two in particular, which you mentioned in the introductory remarks. One is the Law Enforcement Management Institute of Texas, abbreviated LEMIT. Played, as noted, an integral role in bringing that to Sam Houston State University. And it has prospered under new leadership and continues to prosper. Very proud of that. It assists us in numerous ways in terms of staying in close contact with the field. Soon after the program came to Sam Houston State, the police chiefs of Texas themselves went to the legislature and lobbied for a state statute which would require, if you're a police chief, that you attend a 40-hour training program on every 2-year cycle, sponsored by, operated by the Law Enforcement Management Institute at Sam Houston State University. So if you're a police chief, you don't have the option of meeting your 40 hours every 2-year training requirement, which is a state statute here as well as most other states, by going out to the firearms range. You have to come to a management development program here at Sam Houston State University. That has kept us close to the field and the field close to us. It's obviously an opportunity to do research which is related to police administrators' perceptions and challenges and issues that they face, and open doors for more extensive research relationships, partnerships around the state. So the Law Enforcement Management Institute is one which continues to be one of our feature programs.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Could you just talk about the uniqueness of this kind of institute being on a university campus? And you've talked about that briefly, but just maybe a little bit more about what that means and why it's so unique and valuable for academics and for the practice of policing.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's no substitute for direct one-on-one contact, in-person contact. Certainly we can do a lot with information technology and social media and the like, but it's not the same and never will be the same. And developing those personal relationships is a very meaningful advantage of having the program on an academic campus. Furthermore, the curriculum itself is much more likely to be have a theoretical or a broad perspective in terms of its content, its value, and so forth. We don't degenerate into a skills course or speaker development course of some kind. Now there's the balance, and for the field to stay happy with the arrangement, there needs to be some applied material that's integrated into those programs. But it generates ideas. Faculty to participate, working with those with the agencies. Good old happy hour brainstorming sessions, bring ideas back with them, as well as a sense of what limitations and challenges are faced by police managers. There aren't very many comparable institutes around the country. The Southern Police Institute, of course, has been in existence for many decades and continues to do a good job, but does not have a state mandate and has limited programming. Northwestern University, similar kind of situation. And there are some Peace Officer Standards and Training Commissions, post commissions, that sponsor some management training, but not systematic and not required as it is in the state of Texas.
Yeah, okay. I cut you off. I think you were going to talk about another project that you found rewarding.
The other project we found challenging is the word I'm using quite a bit today, is the Criminal Research Information Management Evaluation System. Speaking of contact between the field and the academic world, at a law enforcement management institute seminar held up in the Dallas area in the late 1990s, I was approached by a group of police chiefs from the Dallas area, Dallas-Fort Worth area, who said to me, why doesn't the university do something about the miserable state of affairs of law enforcement information systems? Long story since that time, but that led to the creation of a comprehensive police information system, records management system, computerized, state-of-the-art effort. We are manage the information for 50-plus police agencies and continue to grow around the state. We're contemplating a hosted program where all the data would stay on campus, and just an internet connection would allow us to lower the price to agencies considerably. And we look forward to that happening. And noted earlier, we've got very strong programs now in probation, the complete information system, computerized information system for probation agencies. And this morning, an important meeting was held with the Department of Criminal Justice Institutions Division about software that would track disruptive incidents on all the units, and that's due for delivery in just 60 to 90 days. So I find myself in let me back up for a moment. One of our primary rationale for us operating information systems for law enforcement and or corrections is if you operate the information system, the data management system, it's easy to extract data from that system for research purposes. I often use the comparison of the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. That's owned and operated by the University of Texas. And whenever you check into the MD Anderson Center, you sign away to the University of Texas the right to use information from your treatment as part of its ongoing research effort. In a similar way, if we're running the database, I can do a run on response times in the relationship to whatever, and have an answer back in 30 minutes rather than 30 months by operating those, actually operating those systems. We really look forward to much more extensive research in a probation program, and as well as the institutional program. There's a wealth of information that can be gathered, which on the one hand is useful to agencies for immediate decision making, but is more useful to long-term development of evaluative criteria for the success of probation and institutional corrections programming. All of which leads to the sort of ironic situation that I find myself in, having come in as part of the cadre which changed the emphasis from Sam Houston State University to from corrections to law enforcement, spending the waning years of my time here reinforcing the corrections training, corrections research program.
Right, okay, right. What are your observations on students as you reflect back on your time as a faculty member, and in particular the training that graduate students have been receiving over the years and how that's evolved?
It's certainly evolved in a very positive way. By and large, doctoral education in particular across the country is high quality programming. There's emphasis upon research and research methods, and which incorporates statistical analysis. And that's what doctorate of philosophy degree should be. Many of our graduates graduate with a PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, not realizing that it connotes not philosophy, but as we know it today, but rather philosophy as it was defined in the Middle Ages, which is science. So they in fact have a Doctor of Science degree, and we expect them to, in their academic careers, not merely teach 4 courses and do student advising and some service work, but to engage as well in research. So that I don't think it's out of balance. I think we have to pay some attention to courses that substantively review operations of structured societal response to crime. But it's appropriately balanced. And that's taken 20, 30 years of development and evolution. But by and large, I think we've got it right.
Okay, all right. So I want to ask you about the crimes system and the information management that's been used by police departments and now getting integrated into corrections. I would imagine that launching that effort was quite risky for you, given the demands to teach classes, mentor graduate students, and publish and do all of the research that you wanted to do. Could you just reflect on that a little bit and talk about your decision making and just your view on whether you think that was advisable at the time to do that?
Well, I'm not going to tell you there aren't some days whenever I wonder, why did you ever start this?
Yeah.
So that certainly does occur. I'm now managing 12 programmer analysts, computer programmer analysts, and to say that's challenging is certainly an understatement. At the same time, I think we're going to see enormous benefit from maintaining these databases and maintaining our immediate access to these databases. If you think about, well, much of the research that you and I have conducted over the years, probably the majority of effort, substantial majority of the effort, was in gathering data. It wasn't in the analytic side. It was just cleaning it up, even if you're able to get a data set, which was often difficult to do. So you get a data set, and it's got all kinds of glitches associated with it. It takes a great deal of time to straighten those out. Whereas coming out of the crimes program, it's going to be clean data, ready for immediate analysis. And I look for it to be a tremendous boon to our research efforts here at Sam Houston State University. At the same time, to take a part of your question, would I recommend doing this? Not for everyone. But by the time I launched that effort, I was secure in my role and well balanced and so forth. And for a young assistant professor to undertake something like that effort, probably beyond what we should expect.
I want you to talk a little bit about the early days of the professional organizations, especially ACJS and ASC.
We ended up with 2 professional academic associations in our field. Not unheard of, by the way. There are other fields, in particular in social sciences, that have more than one national association. And the American Society of Criminology was developed in the 1950s. In 1963, a group of members who were in the law enforcement field basically walked out and formed their own organization, the International Association of Police Professors, IAPP. That evolved during the 1960s to become the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences by 1970. And we have continued with the two organizations to this day. There have been periodically discussions between the executive boards of both about a merger. And there are times whenever the separation has its negative side, but at the same time, it broadens the opportunity for faculty and graduate students to deliver papers. One meeting is in November, the other is typically in March, and so they're spread across the academic year, and maintain an emphasis area in this criminology, criminal justice dichotomy. Now that's the negative side. Having the two organizations independent of one another maintains the fissure between traditional criminology, the etiology and demography of crime, and criminal justice programs, structured societal response to crime. And we still have institutions which clearly fall into one camp or the other, although it's been observed by many that you would need the title page to know what any given page out of the annual program is, which organization you were attending. So it's a classic two-edged sword. It maintains a distinction that is not helpful, but provides a forum to balance the two perspectives.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, I guess, would seem to be a little bit of an unusual question, but if you could think back on your 30-year-old self, what would that person predict about where our field and discipline would be today?
My 30-year-old self would have been far more optimistic than justified in predicting the contribution of research and evaluation, program evaluation, to the sophistication of interventions at the police level, at the prosecution level, at the institutional level, at probation, and parole, and all that parallel to juvenile services and the like. We have a long way to go to develop the knowledge base of the field. In one sense, I hesitate to be too dramatic about it, but we barely use the phrase "scratch the surface." Let's talk about police for a minute. In law enforcement, we've had a series of studies on hotspot policing, but findings and methodological rigor are all over the map, to use a bad pun. In that respect, we don't have a firm grip on the dimension of hotspots that might be affected by police, the dosage, the duration of an impact, or even what the impact should look like in and of itself, ranging from saturation, zero tolerance patrol, to the Sacramento program, which involved pulling a police car up in front of a problematic address a couple times a day. So that our knowledge of what will work in patrol is limited across the board. If you move into the area of investigation, there is very little. It's an unexplored wilderness in terms of evaluation of what's effective and not effective in the criminal investigative function. So that in law enforcement, we do have some efforts, strategies which are derived from, which are at least supplemented by, if not directly derived, by research. But reflect on the community policing movement for a moment. The number of research efforts to establish the validity of the array of programs that were developed and promulgated under community policing almost don't exist. There are 2 or 3 that have some evaluative dimension to them. Problem-oriented policing is very difficult to evaluate because you typically you focus on your worst problem issue, whatever that might be, and you don't randomly assign problem-oriented interventions. So law enforcement is seriously lacking, needs much more policy guidance from a research base. Mm-hmm. If we move on to corrections, it's the same situation. I've been working lately, as noted, with probation agencies, and I am amazed at how limited practice in probation and parole is by research efforts. They're very fond in those fields to talk about evidence-based, so evidence-based interventions. But if you look beyond the mere surface, the evidence is very slight. Mm-hmm. That would suggest that one type of intervention is superior to a different type of intervention. Instead, what in both probation and parole is assessed is simply program completion. So if an offender completes a program, that's marked as a success. We have no idea what the reoffending rate is for those who attend a particular kind of program, those who don't. We have no idea about what the duration of the effect might be, mm-hmm. And so forth. Certainly in institutional corrections, we don't track ultimate outcomes in terms of recidivism rates that are linked back to program participation in institutional corrections. Mm-hmm. And then last, but by no means least, the elephant in the room is why the drop in crime. Starting in 1992, crime began falling precipitously throughout North America. In particular, through the year 2000, the decrease in the offense rates across the board were substantial, and that trend towards decreasing crime has continued since the year 2000. So we now have 25 years of experience with falling crime rates. Murder is down 50%. Robbery is down 63%. Burglary is down 61%. And even sexual assault is down 34%, a program which law enforcement can do little to prevent. There have been 6 books published on the situation, and the authors all come to the same conclusion: we really don't know what's going on. There's efforts to compare, get some handle on what might be making a difference and what isn't, to compare North American rates with those in Europe. There was not, it's a myth that there was a uniform drop in crime worldwide during the 1990s and continuing through today. The situation in Europe is a very mixed bag. Some offenses went up, some went down. Some countries saw increases in violent crime, others saw decreases, some increases in property crime, others the other way around. So that there was not a worldwide drop, and looking for a international reason for the drop is not proving very productive. Frequently, police programming would like to take credit for a great deal of the drop, but mm-hmm. the evidence is, once you get out of New York City, the evidence is sparse for the effectiveness of police programming, mm-hmm. The impact of police programming. Incarceration rates are an obvious candidate. So we went from incarceration rates increasing during the 1980s, during the 1990s, so that there's a 5-fold increase in the rate of incarceration number of incarcerations per 100,000 population. So that you look towards incarceration, incapacitation effect of incarceration as an explanation. Problem with that explanation is our neighbors to the north, Canada, because across the board in Canada, among the crime categories that dropped in the U.S., all the major crime categories, there was parallel drops in Canada within a few percentage points. Not that there was a drop of 10% in one country and a drop of 40% in the other. They're statistically identical in terms of the drop. And Canada did not build one new prison during the building boom of the 80s and 90s. So if we look towards attributing that drop to incarceration, you have to explain away what happened in Canada. Mm-hmm. And so far, no one's been able to explain away why the drop was paralleled in the Canadian situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick up something, if that's okay, when you're talking about this. You know, you were obviously present and working and very active at a time when crime in the United States was increasing, you know, quite dramatically. At the time, what were folks thinking about studying that and attending to that on a year-to-year basis and explaining those increases?
You know, interestingly, I think public perception and general attitude about crime and seriousness of crime problem bears little linkage to whether crime is actually increasing or decreasing. Okay. Certainly, more extensive media coverage creates a fear of crime and a perception that crime is still a very, very serious problem. It is a serious problem. One victim is one victim too many. But almost zero acknowledgement of the drop that I talked about. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the linkage, this is not bash the media time. This is just simply a factual situation that exists, is that with Ted Turner and CNN and 24 hours of news coverage, journalists have to, as they say, feed the monster. They have to continue to have newsworthy events flow in. And if you don't have a sufficiently sensational crime locally, you go out statewide. If you can't find something statewide, you go out nationally until you find something to run on that evening news, all important evening news. And consequently, the public, by and large, is not aware. If you were to go out on the street and randomly poll persons, which I've not done, but I'm very confident that what you'd find is that 99% of them would say it's getting worse, mm-hmm. And be totally unaware that it's not getting worse. Not only is it not getting worse, it's gotten considerably better over the years. So on the one hand, we have the statistics, the facts. On the other hand, we have those perceptions mm-hmm. That exist.
So, in talking about the crime drop and the crime decline, how does theory integrate with that and play a role?
We are in, from perception of a number of us, in the midst of a theoretical crisis, because theory is not providing explanation mm-hmm. For this change from very steady, very steep increase in crime in the 70s, some leveling in the early 80s, but then increase again, mm-hmm. and then we hit 1992, and boom. Now, you cannot explain the rapidity of the drop, the suddenness of the drop, by social disorganization theory. Nothing dramatically changed in the 1990s or since then in stressed neighborhoods and that whole phenomenon. You cannot find a reasonable explanation in critical criminology. that attributes crime to wealth distribution and the haves versus the have-nots. And again, nothing dramatically changed in the 1990s, and but through the 90s, the percent on unemployment decreased, the percent on living below the poverty line decreased. So all the indicators fail to explain why crime rose during the 70s, 80s, and then decreased during the 90s. Rational choice doesn't play much of a role that we can discern. Routine activities doesn't play a role to explain the dimension of the decrease and the dimension of decrease through every one of the 50 states and the Canadian provinces. So that we lack a theory. Any discipline needs theory. I differ with some of my colleagues who emphasis is criminal justice in disparaging theory. Theory, after all, predicts. Theory allows us to respond intelligently with foresight. But theory did not predict this drop in crime. In fact, a number of criminologists in the late 1980s was predicting the super predatory generation that would come of age in the 1990s. That didn't happen, and we still can't look towards theory to explain any percentage of this drop in crime. It's up to the next generation, I hope, to tackle this issue head on and start to develop, if not full-blown theories, at least paradigms of increases and decreases of the magnitude that we've seen in the last 25 years.
So in order to have a fresh look or development on theory that might be able to account for some dramatic and long-term increases and decreases in crime might require us to use different research methodologies and examine new data or examine data in a different way. What are your thoughts on what some of those research methodologies and or data might entail?
I think there's some value towards at least pursuing the concept of what's being called now big data. Massive data sets that combine data from diverse sources, establish linkages among those data elements. We have to be able to track, at least nationally and preferably internationally, these patterns and trends, and then to look for linkages with other social phenomena. For example, several researchers, including the late James Q. Wilson, suggested that an explanation for this drop in crime might well be changes in the culture. Traditional researchers reject that phenomenon, though, because it's very difficult to quantify, and if you can't quantify change in culture, you can't attribute, can't run statistical tests, you cannot attribute those changes, any changes that are promulgated become guesswork, and we need to be able to trace other indicators of phenomenon like a change in the culture, and big data holds some promise in that respect. I certainly, at this point in my career, would not suggest that there are cures around the corner, or that we're going to make theoretical breakthroughs in just a few months or a few years at the most. But I think we can contribute something to this macro situation. Now, that's not easy to do. We talked earlier about the difficulty in gathering data, and certainly gathering big data. Look at the difficulty and the shortcomings and the problems with the uniform crime reports. National Victimization Survey. But we need a Centers for Disease Control type of intervention, type of effort, where multiple social phenomena are concurrently examined to ascertain if there is any explanation in that. Nothing's guaranteed, but certainly we're not going to learn anything by continuing to evaluate how saturation patrol works in one district for 3 months in one agency. We've got to, criminology needs to broaden enormously not to use the buzzword, but the data input process.
As we conclude, is there anything else you'd like to acknowledge or talk about?
Yes, one thing that certainly merits mention is the help and assistance I've received throughout my career from two colleagues. Since my arrival at Sam Houston State University in 1977, I worked closely with Professor Jerry Dowling, who's now retired, and we've engaged with one another in innumerable efforts. Jerry started his career with a degree in law. He went to law school at, as he says, the real UT, the University of Tennessee. Spent a number of years working as an FBI agent and brought that experience with him to the university. Second, to acknowledge the input and enormous assistance I've received from program manager Jamie Tillerson. Jamie and I have been working together for 28 years through the Law Enforcement Management Institute efforts and a number of grant programs, as well as the crimes program. And she too is retiring, but has been of enormous assistance, particularly in terms of composition of my most recent book, Police Crime Control Strategies. And last but not certainly least, it's more than an obligation to thank my wife, Martha, of 53 years of support from her, which in the background makes it possible to dedicate the time and effort that this is required.
Yeah, right, okay. All right. Well, thanks, Dr. Hoover. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.